In the humid jungles of the fictional island of Karamura in 1944, Lieutenant Hiroshi Yamamoto leads a small unit of Japanese soldiers who have been cut off from their main force for 3 weeks. The 26-year-old officer from the mountain village of Shirakawa carries the weight of his men's survival on his shoulders, determined to uphold the honor of the Imperial Army despite their desperate circumstances. His unit consists of Sergeant Kenji Tanaka, a gruff veteran from Osaka who has seen too many battles, Private Ichiro Sato, a young farm boy barely 18 who still writes letters to his mother, and Corporal Masa Fujiwara, a former schoolteacher who joined the war effort with reluctant patriotism. They have been surviving on roots, rainwater, and the occasional fish caught from muddy streams, their uniforms torn and their bodies weakened by malnutrition and tropical diseases. The constant fear of enemy patrols keeps them moving through the dense vegetation, never staying in one place for more than a few hours. Yamamoto maintains discipline among his men through a combination of military protocol and genuine care, though he privately wrestles with doubts about their mission and the war itself. The men respect him not just for his rank but for his willingness to share their hardships and make the difficult decisions that keep them alive. As they huddle in a makeshift shelter during another torrential downpour, Yamamoto studies his waterlogged map and realizes they are completely lost, with no radio contact and no clear path back to friendly territory. The sound of approaching vehicles in the distance sends them scrambling for cover, hearts pounding as they prepare for what might be their final stand. Tanaka chambers around in his rifle while the younger soldiers grip their weapons with trembling hands, all of them knowing that capture would mean dishonor worse than death. The rumble grows louder, and Yamamoto makes the split-second decision that will change everything. Instead of fighting to the last man, he whispers to his men, "We surrender, but we die with honor intact." The American patrol that discovers them consists of Battle, hardened Marines led by Captain Robert Mitchell, a tall Texan whose weathered face shows the strain of months in the Pacific Theater. Mitchell's unit includes Sergeant Frank Romano from Brooklyn, whose Italian-American family runs a small restaurant back home, Corporal Billy Hayes, a soft-spoken farmer's son from Iowa who joined up after Pearl Harbor, and Private Tommy Chen, a Chinese-American soldier from San Francisco who speaks some Japanese and serves as their informal interpreter. When Yamamoto and his men emerge from the jungle with their hands raised, the Americans are surprised by their disciplined surrender. Most Japanese soldiers they've encountered fought to the death rather than face the shame of capture. Mitchell orders his men to secure the prisoners while maintaining a respectful distance, having heard stories of desperate soldiers carrying hidden grenades for final suicide attacks. The Japanese soldiers stand rigidly at attention despite their weakened condition, and Yamamoto formally presents his sword to Mitchell in a gesture that surprises the American captain with its dignity and ceremony. Chen attempts to communicate with the prisoners in broken Japanese, learning their names and confirming they have no information about enemy positions since they've been lost for weeks. Mitchell makes a decision that goes against standard protocol. Instead of immediately transferring them to the nearest POW facility, he decides to bring them to the temporary medical station at Forward Base Charlie, where Navy medic Lieutenant David Walsh can treat their obvious malnutrition and infected wounds. The journey through the jungle takes 2 days, during which Mitchell observes the complex dynamics among the Japanese prisoners and begins to see them not as faceless enemies, but as individual soldiers caught in circumstances beyond their control. Yamamoto maintains his leadership role even in captivity, ensuring his men stay strong and follow his example of dignified cooperation with their captors. As they approach the American base, Mitchell turns to Chen and says, "Tell them they're going to receive medical treatment. They might not expect that from us." Forward Base. Charlie emerges from the jungle like a small American town transplanted into the Pacific wilderness, complete with prefabricated buildings, generator-powered lights, and the constant hum of military activity. Lieutenant David Walsh, the base's chief medical officer from Minnesota, has transformed an old supply warehouse into a fully functional field hospital where he treats everything from battle wounds to tropical diseases with equal dedication. Walsh, whose father was a country doctor, believes in treating all patients with the same level of care regardless of their nationality, a philosophy that sometimes puts him at odds with more hardened military personnel. When Mitchell's patrol arrives with the Japanese prisoners, Walsh immediately notices their severe malnutrition, untreated infections, and signs of prolonged exposure to the elements. He orders them taken directly to the medical facility, brushing aside concerns from other personnel about treating enemy soldiers with valuable medical supplies. The base commander, Colonel James Harrison, a career military man from Virginia, initially objects to Walsh's plan, but ultimately agrees to follow Geneva Convention protocols for prisoner treatment. As Walsh begins his examination of the Japanese soldiers, he discovers that Sato has a severe case of malaria. Fujiwara suffers from infected shrapnel wounds, and all 4 men show signs of vitamin deficiency and dehydration. Through Chen's translation, Walsh learns about their weeks in the jungle and begins to understand the physical and psychological toll their ordeal has taken. The American medical staff, including Navy Corpsman Eddie Murphy from Chicago and hospital orderly Jack Peterson from Oregon, work alongside Walsh to provide immediate care despite their initial reluctance to help enemy soldiers. Walsh explains to his staff that their oath as medical personnel transcends national boundaries, and gradually the Americans begin to see the Japanese soldiers as patients first and enemies second. The Japanese prisoners remain suspicious and fearful, expecting harsh treatment based on their military indoctrination about American brutality. But Walsh's gentle bedside manner and professional competence slowly begins to break down their defensive barriers. As Walsh administers antibiotics to Sato's burning fever, the young private looks up with grateful eyes and whispers in broken English, "Why you help, enemy soldier, American doctor?" The medical treatment facility at Forward Base, Charlie reveals itself to be far more sophisticated than anything the Japanese soldiers had imagined possible in such a remote location, with clean white sheets, proper surgical equipment, and an abundance of medical supplies that seem almost luxurious to men who have been surviving in the jungle for weeks. Walsh establishes a daily routine for the prisoners that includes regular meals, medication schedules, and gradual physical rehabilitation designed to restore their strength while maintaining security protocols. The American medical staff begins to interact with the Japanese prisoners on a more personal level, with Murphy teaching basic English phrases while learning a few Japanese words in return, creating an unexpected bridge between former enemies. Yamamoto observes these interactions with a mixture of gratitude and confusion, struggling to reconcile his military training about American savagery with the genuine compassion he witnesses daily from Walsh and his team. The base's chaplain, Father Michael O'Brien from Boston, visits the medical facility regularly and offers spiritual comfort to any patient who desires it, regardless of their religious background or nationality. Chen serves as interpreter during these visits, facilitating conversations between the chaplain and the Japanese soldiers about faith, family, and the universal human experience of suffering during wartime. Fujiwara, the former schoolteacher, shows a particular interest in these philosophical discussions and begins to question many of the assumptions he had held about American society and values. The daily routine at the medical facility creates an odd sense of normalcy that helps all the men, both American and Japanese, momentarily forget the brutal reality of the war raging around them. Colonel Harrison visits the facility regularly to check on security arrangements and prisoner status, but even his initial hostility toward the Japanese soldiers begins to soften as he witnesses their respectful behavior and genuine gratitude for medical treatment. As the prisoners' physical condition improves, Walsh begins planning their transfer to a permanent POW facility, but he finds himself reluctant to end what has become an unexpectedly meaningful experience for everyone involved. The turning point comes when Sato, now recovered from his malaria, approaches Walsh through Chen's translation and asks, "Dr. San, when we leave this place, will other Americans treat us with same kindness you show?" The announcement that the Japanese prisoners will be transferred to the main POW facility on the island of Mindara creates an unexpected emotional response among both the American medical staff and the Japanese soldiers who have formed unlikely bonds during their weeks of recovery. Walsh receives orders from Pacific Command that all recovered enemy prisoners must be processed through the Central Detention Facility, a massive compound designed to house thousands of captured Japanese soldiers under much stricter security conditions. The prospect of leaving Forward Base. Charlie fills Yamamoto and his men with dread, as they have heard whispered stories from other prisoners about overcrowded conditions, minimal medical care, and guards who view all Japanese soldiers as dangerous fanatics deserving of harsh treatment. Walsh attempts to prepare official medical reports that will ensure his former patients receive continued care at the new facility, but he knows that individual attention will be impossible in a camp housing over 3,000 prisoners. The American medical staff organize a farewell gathering in the hospital mess hall, where Murphy presents each Japanese soldier with a small care package containing extra bandages, aspirin, and a few personal items like soap and writing paper. Father O'Brien conducts an informal blessing ceremony that transcends religious boundaries, asking for protection and healing for all the men regardless of which uniform they wear. Chen spends hours teaching the Japanese soldiers essential English phrases they might need at the new facility, while they teach him more complex Japanese expressions and share stories about their families and hometowns. Fujiwara presents Walsh with a small wooden carving he made during his recovery, a crane symbolizing hope and longevity, explaining through Chen that it represents his gratitude for the doctor's compassion. The emotional farewell reveals how profoundly the experience has affected everyone involved, with hardened soldiers on both sides struggling to maintain their composure as they prepare to return to the harsh realities of war. Colonel Harrison, witnessing these genuine displays of mutual respect and affection, begins to question his own assumptions about the nature of the enemy and the possibility of humanity surviving even in the midst of brutal conflict. As the transport truck arrives to take the prisoners to their new destination, Yamamoto approaches Walsh and speaks in careful English he has been practicing. "Dr. Walsh, you show us that honor exists in all good men, not just Japanese soldiers." The journey to the Mindara POW facility takes 12 hours through winding mountain roads and jungle paths, giving Yamamoto and his men their first extensive look at the scale of American military operations in the Pacific Theater. The convoy consists of 3 heavily armed trucks carrying various groups of prisoners, with Yamamoto's unit sharing space with a dozen other Japanese soldiers who have been captured in recent weeks from different battles across the island chain. Among these new prisoners is Captain Noboru Ishida, a bitter career officer who has spent 6 months in American custody and views any cooperation with the enemy as a betrayal of the Imperial Code. Sergeant Jiro Nakamura, a former factory worker from Yokohama who maintains that all Americans are demons despite evidence to the contrary. And Private Hideo Watanabe, a scared 19-year-old who was captured during his first battle and has been traumatized by the experience. The conversations during the long journey reveal the deep divisions among Japanese prisoners about how to maintain honor while in enemy custody, with some advocating complete cooperation, and others, like Yamamoto's group, believing that dignified survival serves a higher purpose. Ishida immediately challenges Yamamoto's authority and questions his men about their treatment at Forward Base Charlie, suggesting that any kindness shown by Americans must be part of a larger psychological manipulation designed to extract military intelligence. The truck's American guards, Sergeant Mike Thompson from Detroit and Corporal Steve Martinez from Los Angeles, maintain professional vigilance while occasionally offering water and allowing brief rest stops, but they remain largely silent and avoid interaction with their charges. As the convoy climbs higher into the mountains, the prisoners catch glimpses of massive supply depots, airfields with dozens of aircraft, and training facilities that demonstrate the overwhelming material advantage of their enemies. Fujiwara quietly observes these displays of American industrial might and begins to understand that Japan's chances of victory may be far more remote than their military leaders have admitted. The psychological impact of witnessing American logistical superiority affects different prisoners in various ways, with some becoming more defiant while others sink into despair about the ultimate outcome of the war. As they approach the Mindara facility late in the evening, Ishida turns to Yamamoto and declares with cold certainty, "You will learn that kindness in war is always temporary, and the Americans will show their true nature soon enough." The Mindara POW facility sprawls across several acres of cleared jungle, surrounded by high barbed wire fences, guard towers, and searchlights that create an intimidating fortress-like atmosphere completely different from the informal medical facility at Forward Base Charlie. Major William Crawford, the camp commandant from Alabama, runs the facility with military efficiency, but lacks the personal touch that characterized the smaller base, viewing his role as managing a large-scale detention operation rather than providing individual care for prisoners. The intake process involves thorough searches, delousing procedures, uniform exchanges, and assignment to barracks housing 50 men each in cramped conditions that immediately shock Yamamoto and his men after weeks of personalized medical attention. Their new living quarters in Barracks 7 house a diverse group of Japanese prisoners including naval personnel, Army infantry, aircraft mechanics, and even a few civilians who were caught in combat zones, creating a complex social hierarchy based on military rank, length of captivity, and attitude toward their American captors. The barracks leader is Lieutenant Colonel Keisuke Moriyama, a decorated veteran who has maintained strict military discipline among the prisoners while advocating minimal cooperation with American authorities beyond what is required by international law. Moriyama immediately questions Yamamoto about his experiences at Forward Base Charlie and expresses concern that his men may have been compromised by American psychological tactics disguised as medical care. The daily routine at Mindara involves early morning roll call, assigned work details ranging from kitchen duty to camp maintenance, limited recreational time, and evening lectures by senior Japanese officers about maintaining honor and preparing for eventual repatriation. Yamamoto finds himself caught between his loyalty to his own men, who remember the kindness they received from Walsh and his staff, and the pressure from camp leadership to conform to a more resistant stance toward their captors. The camp's American staff includes guards who range from professional soldiers like Sergeant Paul Anderson from Nebraska to young draftees like Private Danny Sullivan from Boston, who view all Japanese prisoners with suspicion and barely concealed hostility. Medical care at Mindara is provided by a single Navy corpsman, Petty Officer Robert Kim from Hawaii, who must treat hundreds of prisoners with limited supplies and no opportunity for the personalized attention that characterized their previous treatment. As Yamamoto settles into his new bunk on his first night at Mindara, he stares at the ceiling and wonders, have we traded our humanity for the illusion of maintaining our warrior spirit? The shocking discovery comes 3 weeks into their stay at Mindara, when Yamamoto learns from a newly arrived prisoner that Forward Base Charlie was completely overrun by a Japanese counterattack just 5 days after his group's departure, resulting in the deaths of Dr. Walsh, Chen, and several other American personnel who had shown them such unexpected kindness. The news reaches him through Private Kazuo Abe, a radio operator who was captured during the same attack and provides devastating details about the battle that destroyed the medical facility and killed the men who had saved their lives. Abe describes how Japanese forces, unaware that their own soldiers were being treated there, launched a pre-dawn assault that caught the Americans completely by surprise, with Dr. Walsh dying while trying to evacuate patients from the hospital building that became engulfed in flames. The irony that their rescuers died in an attack by their own countrymen creates a profound moral crisis for Yamamoto and his men, who realize that the Americans who showed them compassion were killed by fellow Japanese soldiers who would have considered such compassion a weakness. Sato breaks down completely upon learning of Dr. Walsh's death, having formed a particularly strong bond with the doctor who saved his life from malaria, while Fujiwara retreats into silent meditation as he struggles to process the tragic turn of events. The news spreads quickly through Barracks 7, creating divisions between prisoners who view the American deaths as a military victory and those like Yamamoto's group who mourn the loss of men they had come to respect and care about. Lieutenant Colonel Moriyama uses the incident to reinforce his lectures about the futility of forming personal attachments with the enemy, arguing that war requires absolute commitment to victory regardless of individual relationships or temporary kindnesses. Yamamoto finds himself unable to celebrate what others call a successful Japanese military operation, torn between his duty as an imperial officer and his genuine grief for the American medical personnel who treated them with unprecedented humanity. The tragedy forces him to confront fundamental questions about the nature of honor, loyalty, and the moral complexity of warfare that his military training never adequately addressed. Captain Ishida, who had predicted American cruelty would eventually emerge, now argues that the deaths prove Americans are no different from any other enemy, and that Yamamoto's group was foolish to develop emotional attachments to their captors. As Yamamoto lies awake that night, haunted by images of Dr. Walsh's final moments, he whispers to the darkness, "What kind of honor is built upon the graves of those who showed us mercy? The psychological weight of Dr. Walsh's death and the destruction of Forward Base." Charlie transforms Yamamoto from a dutiful officer into a man questioning the very foundations of his military indoctrination and personal beliefs about honor, duty, and the meaning of warfare in an increasingly complex world. He begins to withdraw from the daily social interactions in Barracks 7, spending long hours in solitary contemplation while his men watch with growing concern as their respected leader struggles with an internal crisis that threatens to destroy his sense of purpose and identity. Sato's grief manifests in physical symptoms including loss of appetite, insomnia, and recurring nightmares about Dr. Walsh calling for help while flames consume the medical facility, creating a situation that requires careful attention from his fellow prisoners who lack the medical expertise to properly address his psychological trauma. Fujiwara channels his anguish into an obsessive study of English using materials borrowed from the camp library, driven by a desperate need to understand American culture and psychology in hopes of making sense of the contradiction between Dr. Walsh's compassion and the brutal realities of warfare. The camp's routine continues unchanged despite the internal turmoil affecting Yamamoto's group, with daily work assignments, meals, and evening lectures proceeding according to Lieutenant Colonel Moriyama's strict schedule that maintains military discipline among the prisoners. Private Watanabe, the frightened young soldier who had initially challenged Yamamoto's leadership, now approaches him with questions about dealing with guilt and moral confusion, having been similarly affected by stories about the Americans who died at Forward Base Charlie. The camp's American personnel remain unaware of the specific psychological crisis affecting Barracks 7, viewing the Japanese prisoners as a largely homogeneous group of enemy soldiers rather than individuals dealing with complex emotional and moral struggles. Petty Officer Kim, the overworked camp medic, notices increased requests for sleeping pills and stomach remedies from several Japanese prisoners, but lacks the time and language skills to investigate the underlying causes of their distress. Yamamoto begins writing letters to his family that he knows will never be sent, pouring out his thoughts about honor, sacrifice, and the unexpected humanity he discovered among his enemies, using the writing process as a form of therapy to work through his conflicted emotions. The arrival of new prisoners each week brings fresh reports from various battle zones, but none affect Yamamoto as profoundly as the news about Forward Base Charlie, which continues to haunt his dreams and daily thoughts. Lieutenant Colonel Moriyama becomes increasingly concerned about Yamamoto's behavior and assigns Sergeant Nakamura to monitor him closely, fearing that his crisis of faith might spread to other prisoners and undermine camp discipline. The monsoon season brings heavy rains that confine the prisoners to their barracks for extended periods, intensifying the psychological pressure and forcing men to confront their thoughts without the distraction of outdoor work assignments. During one particularly violent thunderstorm, as lightning illuminates the barracks and rain pounds against the metal roof, Yamamoto finally breaks his silence and tells his men, "I have discovered that our enemies are capable of greater honor than we were taught to believe, and now I must decide what kind of man I want to be when this war finally ends." The confession opens floodgates of emotion among his soldiers who begin sharing their own doubts about the war, their fears about returning home, and their struggle to maintain their identity as honorable warriors while acknowledging the complexity of their situation. Captain Ishida overhears these conversations and reports to Lieutenant Colonel Moriyama that Yamamoto's group may be developing dangerous sympathies toward their American captors, potentially compromising camp security and prisoner solidarity. The internal political dynamics of the prison camp become increasingly tense as different factions emerge among the Japanese prisoners, with some advocating absolute resistance, while others, influenced by Yamamoto's example, begin to question the rigid military doctrines that have shaped their worldview. Yamamoto realizes that his personal crisis has evolved into a leadership challenge that affects not only his own men, but potentially hundreds other prisoners who look to senior officers for guidance about how to maintain honor and dignity in captivity. As he prepares for what he knows will be a confrontation with camp leadership about his changing philosophical outlook, Yamamoto reflects on Dr. Walsh's final gift, the realization that true honor might require acknowledging the humanity of one's enemies rather than simply following orders without moral reflection. The stage is set for a dramatic confrontation between different concepts of honor and duty, with Yamamoto caught between his loyalty to traditional military values and his growing conviction that war requires moral flexibility rather than rigid adherence to outdated codes of conduct. Standing at the barracks window during a brief break in the storm, watching American guards patrol the perimeter with the same dedication their Japanese counterparts would show, Yamamoto makes a decision that will change everything for his men and potentially influence the entire camp dynamic. He turns to his soldiers and declares with quiet determination, "Tomorrow, I will request a meeting with Major Crawford to discuss how we might honor Dr. Walsh's memory through our actions as prisoners, even if it means challenging everything we have been taught about proper conduct in captivity." The meeting between Yamamoto and Major Crawford takes place in the camp commander's Spartan office, where maps of the Pacific Theater cover the walls and filing cabinets overflow with reports about prisoner management, security concerns, and communication with higher military authorities about the growing POW population across the island chain. Crawford, initially suspicious of any unusual request from a Japanese officer, listens with growing interest as Yamamoto, speaking through interpreter Corporal James Chen, the younger brother of the late Tommy Chen from Forward Base Charlie, explains his desire to establish a memorial program honoring American medical personnel killed in the war. The proposal shocks Crawford, who has never encountered a Japanese prisoner expressing genuine respect for deceased American soldiers, and he struggles to understand Yamamoto's motivations while considering the potential security implications of such an unprecedented request. Yamamoto carefully explains his group's experience at Forward Base Charlie, describing Dr. Walsh's medical treatment, the kindness of the staff, and the profound impact their compassion had on Japanese soldiers who expected harsh treatment or immediate execution as prisoners of war. The revelation that his brother had been killed at Forward Base Charlie creates an unexpected emotional connection between Crawford and Yamamoto, as both men discover they are mourning the loss of the same individuals who had touched their lives in different but meaningful ways. Crawford admits that he had received reports about the attack on Forward Base Charlie but had no knowledge of the Japanese prisoners who had been treated there, viewing the incident simply as another tactical loss in an ongoing military campaign rather than a personal tragedy affecting specific individuals. The conversation evolves beyond military protocol into a deeper discussion about the human cost of warfare, the possibility of maintaining dignity in impossible circumstances, and the challenge of reconciling professional duty with personal conscience in wartime situations. Yamamoto proposes that Japanese prisoners be allowed to participate in camp maintenance projects that would serve as living memorials to fallen American medical personnel, arguing that productive work would benefit both the prisoners' morale and the camp's operational efficiency. Crawford finds himself drawn to the idea despite his initial skepticism, recognizing that Yamamoto's proposal might offer a solution to ongoing disciplinary problems among prisoners who have been confined without meaningful activity for months at a time. The Major requests 24 hours to consider the proposal and consult with his superiors, understanding that any decision to allow Japanese prisoners greater autonomy in camp activities would require approval from Pacific Command Headquarters. Lieutenant Colonel Moriyama learns about Yamamoto's meeting with Crawford and immediately demands a private conference to discuss what he views as a dangerous precedent that could compromise prisoner unity and resistance to American psychological warfare tactics. The confrontation between the two Japanese officers becomes heated as Moriyama accuses Yamamoto of collaborating with the enemy and betraying his oath as an imperial officer, while Yamamoto argues that true honor requires adapting to circumstances rather than blindly following inflexible military doctrines. Other prisoners in Barracks 7 become aware of the conflict between their senior officers, creating factions that support either Moriyama's traditional resistance approach or Yamamoto's more pragmatic philosophy of dignified cooperation with reasonable American requests. The tension spreads throughout the camp as word of Yamamoto's proposal reaches other barracks, with some prisoners viewing him as a traitor while others see him as a leader, willing to find constructive ways to maintain honor while acknowledging the reality of their situation. Captain Ishida organizes a group of hardcore resistors who threaten to take action against Yamamoto if he continues what they consider treasonous collaboration with American authorities, escalating the internal conflict to dangerous levels that could result in violence among the prisoners. Sergeant Tanaka and the other members of Yamamoto's original unit find themselves caught between loyalty to their respected leader and pressure from other prisoners who question their association with someone accused of betraying Japanese military principles. The camp's American guards begin to notice increased tension among the prisoners, but lack the language skills and cultural understanding necessary to comprehend the complex political dynamics playing out within the Japanese prisoner community. Petty Officer Kim reports to Major Crawford that he has observed signs of stress and conflict among the prisoners, including requests for treatment of injuries that appear to result from fights rather than accidents or work-related incidents. As evening approaches and prisoners return to their barracks after the day's work assignments, Yamamoto realizes that his simple desire to honor Dr. Walsh's memory has triggered a crisis that threatens to tear apart the fragile social order maintaining peace within the camp. Standing before his men as they prepare for sleep, surrounded by the whispered conversations and suspicious glances of other prisoners who view him with either admiration or contempt, Yamamoto understands that his next decision will determine not only his own fate, but the future of everyone who has followed his example of seeking honor through unexpected means. He looks at each of his loyal soldiers, Tanaka with his battle-scarred hands, Sato still recovering from his emotional trauma, Fujiwara clutching his English textbook like a lifeline to understanding, and realizes that leadership sometimes requires risking everything for principles that transcend military orders and national loyalty. With quiet conviction that silences the barracks and draws the attention of every prisoner within earshot, Yamamoto announces, "Tomorrow Major Crawford will give me his answer about our memorial proposal, and regardless of his decision, we will find a way to honor those who showed us that enemies can become brothers when they choose compassion over hatred." Major Crawford's decision to approve a modified version of Yamamoto's memorial proposal creates an unprecedented situation in the Pacific Theater, as higher command reluctantly authorizes the first official cooperation program between Japanese prisoners and American military personnel based on mutual respect rather than simple compliance with Geneva Convention requirements. The approved plan allows 20 selected Japanese prisoners, including Yamamoto's entire original unit, to participate in constructing a small memorial garden near the camp's medical facility, using the project as both a tribute to fallen American personnel and a therapeutic activity for prisoners struggling with psychological trauma from their combat experiences. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a Navy psychiatrist recently assigned to evaluate prisoner mental health conditions, arrives at Mindara to study the psychological effects of Yamamoto's memorial program and assess whether similar initiatives might be implemented at other POW facilities throughout the Pacific region. Morrison, a pioneering female officer from California who has studied the cultural psychology of warfare, immediately recognizes the significance of Yamamoto's willingness to publicly honor former enemies and begins documenting the project as a potential model for post-war reconciliation efforts. The Memorial Garden Project becomes a source of intense controversy within the prisoner community, with Lieutenant Colonel Moriyama formally lodging protests with camp administration and threatening disciplinary action against any Japanese soldier who participates in what he considers a betrayal of military honor and national loyalty. Captain Ishida escalates his opposition by organizing covert resistance activities designed to sabotage the project, including attempts to steal tools, destroy plantings, and intimidate prisoners who support Yamamoto's initiatives through verbal threats and social ostracism within the barracks. The American camp personnel find themselves managing not only the logistics of the memorial project, but also the complex internal politics of their prisoner population, as different factions emerge with conflicting views about cooperation, resistance, and the proper conduct of soldiers in captivity. Sergeant Anderson and his guard detail receive special training from Dr. Morrison about recognizing signs of internal conflict among prisoners and managing cultural tensions that could escalate into violence if not properly addressed through diplomatic intervention. The memorial garden slowly takes shape over several weeks, featuring carefully arranged stones, native plants, and a small wooden plaque inscribed in both English and Japanese with a message about healing and remembrance that Yamamoto composed with input from Fujiwara's growing English vocabulary skills. The project attracts attention from visiting military officials, war correspondents, and even a documentary film crew sent by the War Department to record what they consider a unique example of enemy prisoner rehabilitation that might influence post-war occupation policies. Yamamoto's men find unexpected satisfaction in the physical labor and creative aspects of the garden construction, with Sato discovering a talent for arranging plants while Tanaka's mechanical skills prove valuable for installing a small water feature that becomes the garden's centerpiece. The psychological benefits of the project extend beyond Yamamoto's immediate group, as other prisoners begin requesting permission to participate in similar activities that provide meaningful work and opportunities for creative expression rather than simply passing time until repatriation. Dr. Morrison's preliminary reports to Pacific Command suggest that Yamamoto's approach to maintaining honor through constructive cooperation rather than passive resistance produces better mental health outcomes and reduces disciplinary problems among prisoner populations. The success of the Memorial Garden Project leads Major Crawford to propose expanding the program to include other activities such as English classes, cultural exchange sessions, and even joint recreational activities between American personnel and selected Japanese prisoners who demonstrate trustworthy behavior. Lieutenant Colonel Moriyama's opposition to these developments culminates in a formal complaint to the International Red Cross, alleging that American authorities are using psychological manipulation to undermine Japanese military discipline and force prisoners to betray their cultural values. The complaint triggers an official investigation by Red Cross representatives who visit Mindara to interview prisoners about their treatment and assess whether the memorial program violates international agreements about prisoner welfare and rights. The investigation creates tension throughout the camp as prisoners face pressure from both American authorities seeking to defend their policies and Japanese leadership demanding loyalty to traditional military codes that forbid fraternization with enemy personnel. Yamamoto finds himself at the center of the controversy required to testify about his experiences and motivations while maintaining his commitment to honoring Dr. Walsh's memory regardless of the political consequences of his actions. The Red Cross investigation becomes a pivotal moment that will determine not only the future of the memorial program, but also the broader question of how prisoners of war can maintain their dignity and honor while acknowledging the humanity of their former enemies. As the investigation panel prepares to announce their findings, Yamamoto reflects on the unexpected journey that began with his surrender in the jungle and led to this moment where his personal quest for meaning has become a symbol of hope for reconciliation between bitter enemies. Standing in the memorial garden surrounded by the plants he and his men have carefully tended, watching American and Japanese personnel work together on maintenance tasks that have become routine rather than controversial, Yamamoto realizes that Dr. Walsh's legacy extends far beyond the medical treatment that saved their lives. He turns to Dr. Morrison, who has become an unexpected ally and advocate for his approach to prisoner rehabilitation, and speaks words that will be quoted in her final report to military headquarters. Perhaps the greatest victory in any war is discovering that your enemy's capacity for goodness can inspire you to become a better man than you ever thought possible. The Red Cross investigation concludes with a groundbreaking recommendation that Yamamoto's memorial program be recognized as a model for prisoner treatment that enhances rather than compromises military honor, leading to policy changes that influence American management of Japanese POWs throughout the Pacific Theater and establish precedents for post-war reconciliation efforts. Dr. Morrison's comprehensive psychological study documents significant improvements in prisoner mental health, reduced disciplinary incidents, and enhanced cooperation between American personnel and Japanese prisoners participating in the memorial program, providing scientific evidence that supports expanding similar initiatives to other facilities. The success of the Mindara experiment attracts international attention from allied governments, military strategists, and social scientists who recognize its potential implications for post-war occupation policies in Japan and the broader challenge of rebuilding relationships between former enemies. Major Crawford receives commendation from Pacific Command for his innovative approach to prisoner management, while Yamamoto becomes an unofficial liaison between camp administration and the Japanese prisoner community, helping to resolve conflicts and implement new programs that benefit both groups. Lieutenant Colonel Moriyama's continued opposition eventually leads to his transfer to a different facility, but not before he publicly acknowledges that Yamamoto's approach has achieved better results for prisoner welfare than traditional resistance methods, creating a grudging respect between the two officers despite their philosophical differences. The memorial garden becomes a permanent fixture at Mindara, regularly visited by military officials, medical personnel, and eventually former prisoners who return after the war ends to pay respects to Dr. Walsh and other Americans who died serving in the Pacific Theater. Sato recovers fully from his psychological trauma through his involvement in the garden project and develops a lasting interest in horticulture that influences his post-war career, while Fujiwara's English studies lead to his eventual role as a translator during the American occupation of Japan. Sergeant Tanaka's practical skills and leadership abilities are recognized by American personnel, leading to his appointment as a work crew supervisor and demonstrating that former enemies can develop professional relationships based on mutual respect and competence. The war's end brings the expected repatriation process, but many prisoners who participated in Yamamoto's programs maintain correspondence with American personnel they met at Mindara, creating personal relationships that transcend national boundaries and political differences. Dr. Morrison's research becomes the foundation for innovative approaches to veteran rehabilitation and international reconciliation, influencing American foreign policy and military doctrine for decades after the war's conclusion. Yamamoto returns to Japan as a changed man, carrying Dr. Walsh's lesson about the power of compassion to transform enemies into allies and dedicating his post-war life to promoting understanding between former adversaries through cultural exchange programs and educational initiatives. The memorial garden at Mindara continues to flourish long after the war, maintained by successive generations of American military personnel who understand its significance as a symbol of hope that human decency can survive even the most brutal circumstances of warfare. Years later, when Yamamoto returns to visit the garden as an elderly man accompanied by his grown children, he finds that new plaques have been added honoring Japanese prisoners who died in American custody, demonstrating that the spirit of reconciliation he helped establish has continued to grow and evolve. The final entry in Dr. Morrison's research files contains a letter from Yamamoto, written 20 years after the war, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to discover that true honor lies not in blind obedience to military codes, but in the courage to recognize humanity in unexpected places and respond with compassion rather than hatred. Standing once again in the memorial garden that began as a simple tribute to a fallen American doctor, surrounded by his family and former American personnel who have become lifelong friends, Yamamoto reflects on the extraordinary journey that transformed a moment of surrender into a lifetime commitment to healing the wounds of war. The garden's centerpiece, the small water feature that Tanaka installed so many years ago, continues to flow peacefully among the carefully tended plants, creating a gentle sound that seems to whisper the words Yamamoto spoke at Dr. Walsh's memorial service. In honoring our former enemies, we discover the best versions of ourselves and plant seeds of peace for future generations to harvest.